Hello everyone and welcome to another very nice game from the Jerba Masters 2024. It is round 4 and it is Hans Niemann versus Divya Deshmukh. Hans doing okay, he's co-leading the event, currently on 2 out of 3 points, and Divya only got a draw so far in the first 3 rounds, so she would definitely enjoy at least a draw or maybe even a win with the black against Hans here. So let's see what happens here. It's a very even game, but with a very nice twist in the end. So Hans has the white pieces and he opens with pawn to e4. Divya goes for the Sicilian defense, pawn to c5, knight f3, knight to c6, and Hans goes for the Nimzovich-Rossolimo. Sorry about that. And develops the bishop to b5. We have pawn to d6, the canal attack, castles, and bishop to d7. We have rook to e1, a6, and Hans trades on c6. We have captures, and now finally opening up the center with d4. C captures, knight captures, and rook to c8 and pawn to c4. So going for the Marozzi bind setup against what will soon be a sort of a dragon Sicilian, but with white already traded on b5. So a bit of a weird move order, but it has been played before. However, known moves are knight to f6, e6, and bishop to d7, but here Divya goes pawn to g6, and it is now as of move 9 that we have a completely new game. So okay, knight to c3, we have bishop to g7, bishop to e3, and knight to f6. We have pawn to f3, defending the e4 pawn, castles, and now queen to d2, again, going for a standard setup against this dragon setup, like I said, with the inclusion of that trade of the light square bishop on c6. We have rook to e8 and pawn to b3. Very usual pawn structure in the Marozzi setup. We have queen to a5, and Divya nicely developed the rook to e8, so she prepared queen to a5. Never try playing this and play queen to a5 without developing the rook to e8, because then white will just play knight to d5, and you will be in trouble, because if you trade queens, then the knight first picks up a free pawn on e7 with check. There's a rook on f8, so you have to move the king, and then the bishop takes the queen back, and white just wins the pawn. So rook to e8 is a must if you want to develop your queen to a5, which of course Divya does. Rook 8 to b1, a very nice developing move by Hans. He gets the rook off of this diagonal and prepares pawn to b4. We have pawn to e6, and now rook e back to d1. Of course, you have a very strong grip on the d5 square. You are preventing pawn to d5, and you want to improve on that, making this a permanent weakness for Divya to worry about. King to h8, we have king to h1, getting the kings, both of the kings to some safer squares, and now rook e to d8, adding another defender to the d6 pawn. Hans trades the knight for bishop here, knight captures, b captures, and goes pawn to b4. This is how he looks for advantage. Queen back to c7, and now bishop to f4, nicely aligning the rook with the queen here. There was a very interesting move here, knight to a4, going after bishop to b6, and it seems like there's no good way to handle this, because if you go knight d7 to guard the b6 square, then the d6 pawn is not guarded, but there's this pawn to c5 move, which could be annoying, and then white will play pawn to b5 to create a pass pawn here. So you can play that. You create a pass pawn on the b file. Divya would have a pass pawn on the c file, and it's a very nice game. But Hans doesn't want to give her anything. He goes bishop to f4 first, and now knight to h5. Goes after the bishop, and Hans again has to decide whether he wants to trade everything off, because if bishop captures on d6 and rook captures, he could trade queens. Let's say captures, rook captures, and then bishop captures on c3. And after rook to d3, let's say attacking the bishop to e5, you could play rook b to d1, claim the d file, and the white would have significant advantage here. Okay, it is a bishop and knight against the rook, but yeah, it's a very good position for white. The rook's already doubled. The black king isn't all that greatly positioned. White is up an extra pawn. And yeah, it's a better position. But okay, after knight to h5, bishop to g5 was played going after the rook, and now pawn to f6. Interestingly, bishop to f6 is the way to go, but you know, who would actually play this? I mean, you really love your bishop on this long diagonal. Pawn to f6, we have a bishop back to e3, and now pawn to f5, sort of inviting the bishop back to g5, but okay, then the rook just moves, and you already have a pawn on f5. We have rook d to c1, and now pawn to d5. So if it works, it works. If you manage to get d5 in as black in the Sicilian, you know that you are on your way to at least drawing the game. C captures on d5, f captures on e4 first, and now Hans doesn't capture with the pawn. He plays knight captures on e4, and this is just a big problem for Divya, because after e captures on d5, knight to c5. Now putting pressure on the a6 pawn, but also going for knight to e6 with a beautiful fork here. So she goes pawn to d4. It is the absolute best move in the position, and the idea is that wherever the knight goes, let's say you grab a pawn, then this just wins the game. D captures on e3 because the white queen will also be hanging. So bishop to g5. Hans goes after the rook on d8, and now rook to d5. We have rook to e1. Again, the question is, should you capture on a6? Well, you could go for it. Knight captures on a6, and then the queen moves, let's say, to e5, puts pressure on the bishop, and you have to decide what to do about that. Probably something like rook to c5, and the white is just still better, as the bishop is now defended. If you capture with the queen, then first a queen trade, and then you retake everything on g5. But rook to e1 was played instead by Hans, and now comes bishop to e5, putting pressure on that h2 pawn. And the threat is just capture the pawn on h2 and then go knight to g3. That's the threat. So, but here, knight captures on a6 comes with an attack on the queen, so you have to react to that. And okay, we have queen to d6 and now pawn to g4. This is how Hans defends, and he says, I don't mind opening up my king. I'm up a pawn, and my queen is now also guarding the h2 pawn, and once everything settles, I have the passed a pawn to push to victory. So okay, bishop to f4. She wants to trade off a piece here to remove some of the attackers away from the white king. Bishop captures on f4. We have a knight captures on f4, and now knight back to c5. Okay, the knight snatched the pawn. The knight returned to the sort of a central square, and now a4, a5, a6, a7, and so on is coming. So rook to f8. He has to figure out how to organize an attack against the white king, as if it's just going to be a race, then Hans will be ahead. Pawn to a4. We have pawn to h5, of course. You want to open up even more weak squares in front of the white king. Knight to e4 by Hans, going after the black queen. Here we have queen to d7. Now putting pressure on that g4 pawn, and rook to g1. Rook to e5, and here Hans plays rook b to d1. This is not the best way to go. The best way is to open up the g file and then play rook to e1, but Hans will realize that. Of course, they are both in time trouble, although Divya is basically playing on an increment here. We have rook b to d1 by Hans, and now she just plays queen to d5, showing that Hans's last move isn't all that impressive, because if Hans just continues with, let's say, pawn to a5, then her idea is rook captures on e4, and after captures with check, the knight and queen are guarding that g2 square. You're gonna have to play rook g2, and now she has a variety of options here, whether she would try to push for more than a draw, but if she wants just knight h3 is an instant draw. It doesn't matter what white plays, because the rook cannot move. You're going to play knight f2 check, king g1, knight h3 check, king h1, knight f2 check, and so on. It will be a draw by repetition. However, after queen d5, rook d to e1 by Hans, he figures out that he made a mistake here, and now she has to continue with something like h4, h3, or even pawn to g5, but she played king to g7, and this, puts the king in front of the rook. But even though that's not the real issue here, g captures on h5, knight captures on h5, and now knight to g5. The knight is just very annoying here, and also black will have to keep an eye on that e6 square. So she goes rook captures on e1, rook f to f5 was much better here. She captures on e1, she trades off a pair of rooks, rook captures on e1, and now knight to f4, keeping an eye on that e6 square, and now pawn to h4, defending the knight, as also the knight is now in between the queen and the knight on g5, so queen captures on g5 was the threat. And you really need that knight here guarding the f3 pawn. If queen captures and f3 happens, then Hans will be in a lot of trouble. And here she played rook to f5, and Hans played rook to e4, which is a great move, but even more precise would be rook to e7 with check. She was incredibly low on time, so I imagine Hans just wanted to play faster. But the point is that after rook e7 check, if she goes here, then it's checkmate. If she goes to f6, then rook f7 check wins the black queen. And if she goes back, then you go back to e4, and you've weakened the black king. The black king is much less active than it would be on f7, preparing to come to f6. So it's just thinking long term about the endgame. It's much better to have the black king as far away back as possible. But here, after rook to e4, she made a huge error. d3 is the move you have to play, even though even in that position, Hans would still be on a path to victory. She played queen to d6, and he was in this position on move 42 that her time ran out, and Divya lost on time. But also, the position is now completely winning for Hans. So just for fun, feel free to pause the video and try to find the absolute best move for Hans while I give you a couple of seconds here. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on realizing that the king on g7 is in the reach of the white knight on g5. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is rook captures on f4. Rook captures on d4 is also winning, but rook captures on f4 is much cooler, as it's a temporary piece sacrifice. And now after queen captures to rook captures, there is of course knight to e6 check with a fork, and after the king moves, knight captures on f4, and Hans will just be up a full knight, and now the a-pawn will march forward and become a queen. Very nicely done by Hans, winning his second game in this event, and he's still undefeated. Divya still only on half a point out of 4. So she will try, of course, better in the rounds to come. But yeah, with this victory, Hans is now in the lead. And if you guys are interested in who is leading, let me just quickly check here. Oh, sorry, leaderboard. Yeah, Hans is leading with 3 out of 4. Then we have with 2.5 Vasily Ivanchuk and Darda Daniel, and then Bilal Belasen, not really sure if that's how you pronounce it, Gilles Moussard, Aryan Tari, Marc-Andre Maurizi, and Divya Deshmukh currently in last place. But Tari won a very nice game. It was a beautiful miniature, 25 moves only. So that is the game that I will show you next. So stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Kevin Hawkins, Daniel Heist, GMD over GMG, Anthony Palumbi, and Matthew Witten for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.